Special meeting of the Waterville City Council. There are agendas available in the file pocket near the entrance or online at the City of Waterville's website. All items appearing in consent agenda are voted on in one motion and vote. Generally, these items are routine in nature and do not require discussion. All items listed under unfinished business or new business are voted on separately. First, councilors will be given an opportunity for questions or comments. Once all councilors have had an opportunity to speak, citizens will be given an opportunity for comments or questions. Citizens must speak at the podium and identify themselves. Each citizen will be allowed one opportunity to speak and will be limited to 3 minutes. Finally, the councilors will be given another opportunity to speak or comment. Citizens who would like to speak on a topic that does not appear on tonight's agenda will have an opportunity to do so at the end of the meeting under public comment section of the agenda. I'll move the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance, disclosure of conflict of interest.
Hey, would you unmute Patty? I can't hear anything. I'm sorry about that.
Is that better?
Thank you.
Can you hear anything now, Councilor Klepak?
What?
Yeah, I'm good.
You can hear now?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm all good.
Okay.
All right. Old business, reconsideration ordinance 110, 2022.
We would need a motion to reconsider.
Motion to reconsider. Gotta turn my mic on.
He needs a second.
Second. Yeah.
Shall
Roll.
I read the title?
Yes, please.
Amend the zoning ordinance 8 Highwood Street.
Do you need a roll
So,
call for that?
This is back on the floor, with a motion and a second. It's back on the floor as if there was no first vote. So now it's up for discussion.
All right. I'm going to go to Councilor Green for a moment.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Councilor McCormick, for reconsidering and allowing us to have this conversation again. It's a really important one to have. Communities all over the state are having it, and the country, actually, as we face the housing crisis that we're looking at and the changing needs of our community, our buildings, our people, our resources. I just want to share, because I'm pretty familiar with a lot of housing data, but people may not realize that Waterville has 53% renter households compared to 47 home owner-occupied, which is extremely high on the rental side. 66% of those households, that's 2,211 households in Waterville, can't afford the median two-bedroom rent. That's from Maine State Housing 2020. It's probably worse now. In addition, in the past decade, the number of low-income units for extremely low-income renters, of which many are seniors, has dropped significantly. And there are now only 51 units for every 100 extremely low-income households. That's 30% of the area median income. So this is a really critical problem that we have in our community. And while it's important for us to hear all sides of this debate, I just want to express my opinion that this is an extremely important project, and one that is special because it's coming with public funding. This building would be very hard to rehabilitate as a for-profit entity. And it also would resolve another problem which we have in the community, which is vacant buildings. We have 77 that are known, and that represents 100 units of housing, roughly, probably more. So what I've, in all of the debate, I've heard, well, this isn't going to put a dent in the problem. And yeah, it won't solve the problem, but I would offer that it will put a dent in the problem with 30 units for seniors, and many of those seniors may be moving out of homes which can then be occupied, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot of different possibilities, tools in our toolkit to solve our housing crisis. And we really have to be creative and open-minded and take a big picture view of our community and what is best for us now and in 10 years. I also just want to remind everyone that this is the first vote again, right? We're still going to discuss this again. So again, I'm really glad that we're having a very robust conversation, because it is important for people to be aware of what the project's about and what the stakes are. And I'll leave it at that.
Any other councilors?
I have one question for City Manager. Steve, have all the parties that were present last time come together and made any changes to their stances as far as coming to an amicable agreement about things that were brought up last time?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Claude?
Well, Mr. City Manager, if I'm correct, there was an incident at this location a couple of years ago. Would it be appropriate for the Chief of Police to explain what happened there and give us a little background on what the danger is to having vacant buildings like this?
I would bow to the mayor to allow him to speak.
Mayor, councilors, historically, the Highwood Street area has been,
Flip up. Is your mic that way? Up?
We
Is
can
it
hear.
on? Okay, yes.
is it on?
Yep.
Okay. As I said, historically, that area has been a safe area around Mount St. Joseph when you talk about Highwood, Harrow, Greenwood Streets. Matter of fact, in looking through our records since 2010, we've only had about 28 calls up there, and many of those are just very, very minor complaints. Criminal mischief, an abandoned car. The most serious, to go to Councilor Frankie's question, happened in 2020 when a young man who was having some issues went into that building with a rifle, and of course we ended up responding to that. He eventually barricaded himself in there. He wouldn't come out, and eventually he committed suicide in the building. But again, that street, that particular area has been pretty safe, I would say, in all the time that I've been here. Again, if you look at the calls for service, we're talking about welfare checks, residential check, citizens assist, abandoned car, a criminal mischief. And we're getting some of those criminal mischief calls because it is abandoned. You get neighborhood children, I think, that are breaking some of the windows. So that's, I think, a good overall of what the neighborhood is up there. It's fairly safe.
I got a question for Mr. Watson up over there. Brian, you've been in the building. Are the bones of the building good?
Yeah, I've been in the building several times, as recently as last week. The building's got some issues, but we've hired an engineer to go in and do an engineering study. And we found out that inside the building, the existing owner had done some demolition work and had taken out a couple of load-bearing walls, which has created some floor sagging that's kind of trellised its way up through the building in certain locations. It's not any imminent danger or anything like that, but it's there. So we pulled in a contractor, Sheridan Construction, who we're familiar with and have used on other projects. Walked through the building with them with the engineering drawings, looked at the remedial work that needs to be done, and received a proposal to do, we call it the stabilization work. So that work has got to be done, you know, if we do end up with the property and proceeding with this, that would be first order of business. Interior work, it's a couple of weeks worth of work for a small crew to go in and do this remedial work. So while I had the engineer in the building and the contractor in the building on 2 separate visits, we started in the basement and went up through the building to assess the structural capacity of that building. And, you know, ledge is right there at the surface, so you can't dig down too far before you hit ledge. So the building elements themselves are founded directly on ledge. And if you look up through the things that you would normally cite to see how the building is standing, the corners are nice and vertical. The roof lines are all fairly true. There's none of that stair-step cracking that you would expect to see through brickwork, for example, if there was considerable amounts of settlement and movement in the building. So bottom line is, I've been in the construction business for a while. I'm retired now. I think the bones of the building are good. I asked the guys from Sheridan Construction, you know, are the bones of this building good? Is it worth rehabbing this building? And they said, absolutely. And I asked the professional engineer that we engaged to do a structural analysis, is the building solid? And he said, absolutely. So,
The other thing I have, while we're trying to get something started here with this, in my ward, we've had a major sell-off. And with this sell-off, we've had people being evicted. So I'm not sure where they're going. I don't know if they have housing. I know there are no for rent signs in my ward right now. I've got to look at the bigger picture. We're losing right now, we're not gaining. This would be a gain.
would it be
It's gonna be a damned expensive gain, because we don't know what else we're gonna, while they're doing the engineering studies, we don't know what else we're gonna find in that building. Is this gonna be another Gilbert Street School when they got into the gym and found out it was full of asbestos and almost doubled the cost of doing the project? Those are things we don't know, and we're not gonna know until they get going.
So we do know some of them, Tom.
All right.
So there is asbestos in the building. I saw it, and it's in the boiler room in the basement. It's contained, the room is probably 10 by 12, and it's got the asbestos sheeting on it. So we know and that's the only place that I've seen asbestos. The other places that you would expect to see it, floor tile, pipe insulation, didn't see it. We also believe that there's probably lead paint in the building, and that'll have to be taken care of as well. So we've, in our budget, our rough order of magnitude budget that we've done, we've allowed for some of that remediation of asbestos and lead paint. So we have
All right.
we have taken that into consideration.
That was one of the things I was looking at. Is this something that we can set, it's salvageable, or
Yeah.
I don't want to see a Band-Aid put on something and good luck. I know the HUD's not going to let that happen, but
Right.
asking you, the engineer, if it's good, I'm fine.
Yeah, it is. And if it's appropriate, I've got a couple of other updates to some information that we had the other day. I can jump right in if that's okay. So we've continued to kind of develop the floor plans for the building, just because we just weren't at a place to just stop everything. So we continued to do that at obviously at our own risk and expense and I got a set of plans yesterday, and you know, we've been talking about 20 to 30 units, and everybody kind of gravitates to the 30 number. In reality, it's going to be closer to the 20 number. So what we've done is we've taken a floor plan that we floor by floor have laid out these apartments that are about 500 square feet. There's a brick wall that bisects the building kind of in the back into the old part and the new part. Right in that area on the first and second floor, it's a little bit problematic because we got a small apartment there. So that's a studio apartment. So we got a couple of those on the floors. We've got laundry facilities. But the interesting thing is talking with our designer, we were looking at that third floor area on the old house that directly looks into the neighbor's window. And that may or may not be suitable space for apartments because of the roof is low in there. There's a lot of angles. The thing is that part of the building is kind of broken up. So that may not be, it may or may not be residential units up there. It's honestly just too early to tell. But again, Katie made the invitation in our last meeting to have others join our building committee, provide us with some input, maybe some thoughts on what that space might be used for, maybe some thoughts on how to take care of this issue of the sight line that exists, which, you know, every time I drive around town, it's like, oh, you could see right from one room to another. I mean, it's all over. It's just the way that housing is. But I think there's ways that we can ease tensions with this sightline issue. And again, I'm not even sure that space is all that suitable for for residential areas up there. So those are the things that we've done. We did get an estimate back from Sheridan. Their numbers were similar to ours. Our preliminary estimate was $15 million. They're in that 12-ish area. So with the information that we have, to have two numbers that are that close together for that amount of work on an old building with no plans, pretty remarkable that we'd have numbers that line up that well. So we're in that 12-ish million dollar area. So that number's been validated, and it's not just our, little rough order of magnitude estimate. So those are from the construction and engineering perspective, those are the two or three things that have been further developed as we've gone through this project. I'm sure that there's going to be a ton of questions, so I'll quit rambling on here, but just wanted to have the opportunity to bring those up, and I appreciate it.
When will you know when it may or may not be? Like, it's no secret that I sort of like the project, but you have some issues, and one of them really is that third floor. So at some point, you're gonna have to make a decision so that the residents in that area know, listen, we know what you want. We know that we can turn these into apartments, but really, we're not going to do that. We're going to make these into offices, so that's what faces you on that side. Like,
There's too much space over there to make it all offices.
on the third floor?
No, not, but offices, third floor office.
I'm talking about the third floor. I
So-
mean, you're always gonna have people that can look into your first and second floor. If I look at my neighbor's house, who's 15 feet away, I can look into his, if I really want to, I can look into his windows. I mean, my bay window has no curtains on it. Anyone can look inside my bay window. But we're talking about the third floor, looking down into somebody else's house is a very different sort of view. And I think that if you can manipulate it to where those are offices that are being used during the day, somebody's there till 5 or 6 o'clock at night, that's a very different sell to the people that are living there,
Yeah,
have been.
Yeah, so it would be foolish for me to make a commitment right now on what we're gonna do with that building 4, 5, 6 years down the road when the second phase of construction is scheduled to begin. So we've got the first phase, which is the half of the building that's closest to College Avenue. That's phase 1 of the project. That contains, I think it's 12 of the units. That is about 60% of the budget, maybe a little bit more than that, because there's things that we'll have to do for the whole building, like a roof, for example. And then, so now the question is, when can we afford to begin construction on the second phase of the work? And I don't think any of us have a really, really solid idea of when that's gonna be. Our plan
Oh, I
would
do. I'm gonna be
be, as
dead
soon as
by
we get
then.
done with this one, we wanna start building the next phase. That's our plan. So we've got 6, 8 months of pre-construction work from the time we take ownership of the property, 6 or 8 months of construction work pre-construction work, and then about a year of construction. So we're a year and a half out from whenever it is we get to go ahead to start, and we've got the funding lined up to do this first phase of the work. It would be our intent then to seamlessly go to, while we're building out that first half, start fundraising, start doing the money, and begin second phase of the work, one right after the other. Now, I've seen phased approaches to projects before. They don't always work that way. That, you know, different funding avenues come into play, different community aspects come into play. There's just so many elements, a lot of evil forces at work, that it's hard to say just exactly when that second phase of work would start. We would really want to start it right as soon as the first phase is completed. So
So within 18 months.
it would be after the 18 months, at 18 months. So if we got 6 or 8 months of pre-construction work in a year, it's a year and a half, a year and 20 months, at that point, we would start construction of the next phase of the work. That's what we'd like to do. Now, will we have the money to do that? We don't know. We can't, no money, no mission. We can't start it until we have that.
But we can't guarantee this, what the layout of the second phase looks like. Am I understanding that right? I'm not trying to be.
No, right
I
now-
wanna be very crystal clear
Right
about
now,
what you're saying
this
right now.
moment right now,
Yep,
I can show you what we've got for a layout for
but
the,
you can't, can you put that in writing though?
No.
The way I understand it is, phase one is the College Ave half of the building,
Yeah.
that's pretty much concrete, the way I'm understanding it, from you. That's how it's gonna be, it's gonna be 12 units roughly, okay? And then phase two is the Central Ave half of the house, and that's going to be half of the building. And that is the malleable, you have no real concrete plans for that half of the building. Am I right in saying that?
we've got, that's not as far developed as the first half. And just so I'm clear, none of these plans are concrete. This is
Okay,
real early in the process.
Okay.
This is way earlier than, we haven't done electric schematics, plumbing, we haven't done escapes.
so you could, and I want to throw a hypothetical out there, there is potential of flipping the entire building over and putting office on College Ave side and apartment on Central Ave side. Hypothetically, you could.
Hypothetically, you could do a lot of things, but
But-
the space, the way that the space is laid out in the house part, it's more conducive to office space. And the way that the space is laid out in the newer part of the building is much more conducive to residential space.
Okay.
So on the third floor, we've got, it's empty. It just says multi-purpose.
Okay,
So that, I mean, we don't know.
Okay.
We just,
and that's fair.
it's just isn't, it isn't that time in this project's life cycle to have that level of information available. What we have is we've determined the building is buildable. We've determined about how much it's gonna cost to do that. We've got a schedule on how long it's gonna take. And we have invited anybody that would like, well, I shouldn't say anybody that would like, we don't want 60 people on our building committee, but, you know, representatives from the neighborhood to join that to help us flesh out what happens on the third
If you
floor.
get 60 people on one committee, I would applaud you.
Yeah. I've seen those committees work and
Yeah, it was called our parking committee.
any other questions for me?
Does anyone have questions for him? Not at this time.
Thank
Good
you.
for right now. Any other counselors before I open it up to the public? All right, I'm gonna open it up to the public. Go ahead.
Good evening, Council. Thank you, Councilor McCormick, for bringing this back to the table. I think these are really valuable and important conversations. So I don't think I need to go on about how bad we need housing or anything like that. I do want to talk from a planning board perspective of what this building could practically be used for, what we see coming through, and what this process would look like going forward should you decide to rezone this property, because I think we're getting really like in the schematics of things that come up later in a planning board discussion that aren't really relevant to the zoning of this building. So I really want to review some of that right now. So I've heard a couple misconceptions over the course of the last month that we've been talking about this. Number one was that the building was a former office building and should stay an office building. So that's actually false. This building most recently was an office building, yes, but prior to, it was actually housing. So it was built as a nurses' college. It was then, during World War II, they vacated after the war. Nuns moved in, and they lived there until Maine General took over the building. Now, what happened then is Maine General needed office space. The Hathaway building was not done yet. The Thayer campus was not remodeled yet. The Augusta Hospital had not been finished yet. And so they had temporary office space in that building. That is how we got a Contract A zone on a Contract A zone that allowed them to only operate that as office space. Unfortunately, the way that the ordinance was written at the time is not how we're currently writing ordinances. So now, when we put a contract zone on it and it says it cannot be used for this ever again, it reverts back, or it can revert back to its original use. This would actually be the original use of the building. So you are being asked to remove the contract zone, okay? Number two, that this project is being rammed through. So I want to just bring us all back to this process because it's not being rammed through. In fact, this is the fourth public meeting where this has been on the agenda. So the council had this project, they sent it to the planning board, we had a public meeting, people were able to discuss it there. It came back, and we all voted in favor of this project after robust discussion. It came back to the council last week. You had a public meeting. This is now the next public meeting, and then there will be one more. That is not ramming it through in any way. That's following the exact process that every other developer and project has to go through in this city. So to say that we're doing things faster is just false. I also want to note that when and if the council decides to revert this back to zoning, which is consistent with the other surrounding properties, it would have to undergo site plan review. And at that time is when Mr. Watson would come to the planning board with a full layout. This is where our property, this is where we're gonna have residential, this is where we're gonna have office. It is absolutely ludicrous, honestly, to ask them to have that information at this point in the process because we haven't even allowed them the opportunity to purchase and start developing the property. Why would they hire engineers and architects to go through this and tell you exactly where every single bedroom is going to be? That's a huge expense that they can't take on until they know that this is a viable option. So we cannot get caught in the weeds with that. So in conclusion, and also I would like to note that I see vacant office space everywhere in this city, right? We just went through a pandemic. We know that office space is a totally different conversation than it was 5-10 years ago. People are working from home. Everybody's lives have changed. And we have vacant office space on KMD and commercial space there. We have commercial space on Main Street. We have commercial space on Upper Main Street and office space there. I do not foresee an office ever going back into this building. As Mr. Watson had said, it would be very expensive at this point to renovate this building. The use of public funds is what's going to make it viable. And so it's just inconceivable that it will ever be office space again. The way that this is zoned, that is the only ever option. And so what is going to happen if you do not look into a solution for the zoning of this property is it will continue to sit there vacant. It has already been vacant for almost 10 years. It will continue to sit vacant. It will continue to be a strain on our public resources. You know, that means if there's ever a fire there, our fire department has to respond. Our police has to respond. If kids are breaking into those buildings, they have to respond. This is a drain on our resources, and it's going to continue to sit as a vacant building. unless an office goes in, because that's all, the only legal use for that building as it sits today. So I think that it's really important for you to step outside of this conversation a little bit and understand where this zoning problem sits. Thank you.
Any question? No, hold on, Samantha.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Did you, when you had the public, when it was in your hands, did you have this kind of response? Along with somewhere around the neighborhood of 20, I haven't exactly counted them, somewhere around 20 different responses on both sides of this issue. Did you have this kind of response at your planning board?
No, we didn't,
When you did your unanimous vote on it?
No, we didn't, but we had the same neighborhood response that you had last week.
Did you have this response, though?
No, we didn't,
Okay.
like I said, but we had the same as you took with your vote last week when you made that decision.
And that's fair. That's fair. Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions for Sam?
Is the thing on? I want to thank Samantha for really coming in and clarifying like the process that it takes, because I feel like we're a little bit stuck in the weed on this project, and yeah, so I just want to thank you for coming in and clarifying that for us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Yes. You can yell. Yell. Go. Just yell out.
Yeah, I
for
can
it.
repeat the question.
I just have a couple questions. So I think when you were talking about the history of the building, way back in like World War II, before that, like before like Maine General owned it and put it as office spaces. I'm just curious because I know the house that I grew up in is right there, but I don't think our house is that old. So was it a residential neighborhood back then too?
I believe it was zoned as a residential B. I'm sorry. She asked what the original zone was, and I believe after reading the ordinance that was passed in 2009, which put the contract zone on this property, I believe it was a residential B. And so that would have allowed for housing, obviously. The reason why the city planner had recommended that we go with the commercial C1 zone is because a couple months ago, the council tasked us with looking at places throughout the community, specifically on College Ave, that would be well suited for kind of that mixed use commercial residential areas, because we're trying to address this housing problem, this shortage that we are all seeing. When Councilor McCormick says his neighborhood, I mean, all of these apartment buildings are being sold and people are being evicted, and there is literally nowhere for them to go. People can't go from a fixed rent using a voucher for $800 a month to something that's $1,600 a month because it won't cover their voucher. They're going to be homeless. So this is an actual crisis that we're facing in our community, and it gets worse every day. But yeah, it would have been a residential B. The reason why we're saying commercial C1 is because we just rezoned all of the surrounding properties to that same thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like that Homewood Place and all of those, the properties that are just along College Ave are the commercial C1. They can be used for mixed use, an office and housing. If it was residential B, they wouldn't be able to have any office space within the building whatsoever. They would only be able to have housing. You're welcome.
Any other counselors? Anyone else from the public? Go ahead, sir, and then Cassie.
Hey, everyone. Can you hear me all right? I just wanted to clarify one point. I was at the planning meeting as well as one of the residents, and I don't think anyone's saying that the planning board or the council is trying to ram this project through. I think it's more the timeline of developing a 5 to 6 year project in the space of less than 6 months. And along with that, the notifications that came out, like most people here might have got one letter to say, here's a planning meeting, attend. And on that letter, it just said, homeless shelter wants to do this. And then going to that meeting, then we learned a little more about what it may or may not be. But 3-4 years down the line, like the councillor pointed out, you know, the plans may change, things may change, and how is that going to affect us then? And I think that's a lot of where the timeline issue is coming from. How quickly this is progressing through, sort of, I don't want to say without us having a chance to speak, because we're obviously here, but, you know, we weren't notified that there was a change in vote, or that we should be here tonight. Obviously, we're here and we did find out, but, you know, I wasn't notified in any sort of formal way, and that may not be the process, and that's also part of it. Like, do we know the process properly? What is the process? And the timeline that goes along with that. So I just wanted to point that out. And we're not accusing the planning board of anything, I don't think.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch his name.
Your name, sir?
My name's Fergal, simple.
Thank you. Go ahead, Cassie. You can go after.
Slippery here, careful. My name's Cassie Julia. I'm a Ward 4 resident. I'm also on the planning board. I think that a couple of things, like Sam's information was very technical and informative, but a couple of things that changed my mind during the planning board meeting was, first of all, my daughter has been friends with several kids who have lived at the homeless shelter that she went to school with, and it has always been something that has made me sad, I guess, as a resident, how transient that population is. I know that your kids go to the public school, your kids go to the public school. I guarantee they're also friends with some kids who have lived in the homeless shelter, but probably not for a long time, because those kids come in and move out. I've always been of the opinion that those kids deserve to have a house, you know, a space to get on the school bus that isn't maybe a hugely stigmatized place. So that was the first thing that resonated with me during your presentation. The second thing that resonated for me was that I live in the general vicinity of the Gilman Street School. And I remember when that whole thing went before the planning board, we all were very worried about the subsidized housing that was going in to our neighborhood. We were very worried about the disruption that it would bring. There was I mean, you want to talk about a response? This is like nothing compared to what was going on around the Gilman Street School. Were you around for that, Rebecca?
Yes.
Yeah, it was insane, like so many people. And for years, people have lived there. It has been nothing but a pleasant addition to our neighborhood. A empty, vacant building invites a lot of problems with it. Now, something we didn't get with the Gilman Street School, this is something that resonated for me too, is that the residents of the Gilman Street School are not vetted like they are going to be at this new property. All of the people, is this still correct? Has this changed? The people that are moving in there have background checks. They have to go through a very specific process in order to be approved to live there, because there are children that will be there. It's a property that will be surveilled 24/7, and I don't have that guarantee in my neighborhood. Nobody here, except for the people in the vicinity of that building, will have that kind of guarantee. There are so many sex offenders that live in my neighborhood. There are sex offenders that live all over this city, but the people in that building will not be on a registry, correct? So that was the other thing that really changed my perspective. Is it frustrating to have a vacant building in your neighborhood? Is it maybe for some people frustrating that it's vacant and decaying, or is it frustrating because there might now be people living there and there might be traffic where there once was no traffic? That's a valid concern in my opinion. That was the original thing that I was worried about. But once I really thought about, my son was outside playing football at football practice when the shooter was in that building, and they all had to be evacuated. It was very traumatic, and that was blocks away, right? But I have friends that live in the neighborhood that couldn't go to their homes that night. To me, that is way worse than having families and elderly people who are potentially homeless, who have also been criminally background checked and are vetted and have to maintain a certain lifestyle in order to even live in this building. That is so much better to me. So that is why those are some things that were obstacles for me as a planning board member that were alleviated in the course of that conversation and the course of that meeting that really helped me feel okay about approving the zoning change, reverting back to its original land use. I understand, I've been there as a community member worried about who's moving into our neighborhood, but the guarantees that you're getting as neighbors are pretty awesome. And I think that's probably gonna be reverted back to residential use at some point. And this is a pretty good deal to have those guarantees. So does anybody have any questions for me?
No, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Hi, I'm Nancy Sanford, and I live in Ward 1. And although I'm not in the immediate vicinity of this, I do live on May Street, so it's not that far away. And I am in total support of this effort. To me, if we can give elderly, poor people and homeless families a place to be, why not? And another piece of this is that these apartments are going to be supported. They're supported living, which means there's going to be case management. And so hopefully the population of the elderly folks are going to be long-term people. And the only difference between the people that will be in that building, be it the old elderly folks or the younger homeless, previously homeless people, is that they need to worry about where they're going to sleep and eat. And this is a solution to that. And so again, I am in complete support of this project. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. So, can you all hear me? Is that good? Okay. So I always pay really close attention whenever there are any proposals for projects like this to hopefully help with, in creative ways, right? To help with housing issues. And so that's the prefaces. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Lyndall Beatty, and I think I'm in Ward 5, if I remember correctly, but I have moved around a few times. So I am teaching staff at one of the colleges in town, where I teach 50 to 80 students a semester. And although I have a Master of Science and decades of experience in education, I make just a smidge more than starting teachers now make in the state of Maine. It has been very challenging to live in Maine. I moved here for STEM jobs in these small, private, prestigious liberal arts schools, and I have never made enough money to be comfortable or to make ends meet. Rents have skyrocketed in the 9 years that I've lived in the state. I live paycheck to paycheck, and one emergency situation would be really all that it would take to push me over the edge and into, I don't know, my friend's basement or something like that. And my rent's also about to increase, which will take up half of my take-home pay. And so I'm about to be priced out of my apartment, my current position and maybe even the state, to be quite honest. So projects like this one are of critical importance to other individuals like myself. We don't make enough to be able to move into Gilman Hall, we make too much to be able to get those support and subsidized housing, but then we don't make, or I've got myself confused now. But we make too much to get the help, but we don't make enough to really be able to get by. And it's very stressful, right? It's stressful for one's health. And so we're definitely unduly burdened by the cost of living and all these housing increases. Just so you all know, the cost of living in Waterville is comparable to Denver, Colorado. So I'll let that sink in. So this option would have been very helpful to me a few years ago when I was in the middle of a housing and family crisis. So all it takes is like one really bad situation, right? And then you've got a professional with the Master of Science and decades of experience in education who might end up needing to live in a situation like this until they can get back on their feet. So I encourage the City Council to support this rezoning and this project in general, and to continue to work on the housing challenges in this community so that we don't have to move. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Thank you. I'm Elizabeth Leonard. I live in Ward 4, and I apologize to those of you to whom I sent basically the same letter, but I'll share it again today. And as a retired historian, I just want to commend Samantha on her excellent historical research that she did. Always a pleasure to hear that kind of research. So I just want to express the sort of shock and dismay that I experienced at the outcome of the vote last Tuesday at the City Council meeting regarding this carefully thought through, planning board approved, housing committee approved plan for transforming a long vacant building into a new, deeply affordable, supported housing complex for families and the elderly. Our city so clearly needs housing for its abundant and growing number of low-income and low-wealth residents who are, I would like to highlight, as much members of our community as anyone who already can afford to own a home or rent an apartment. And I did hear some comments in last week's meeting that were disturbing to me in terms of the way those people were framed at, there's the residents and then there's those people, and those people are our community members. And I think it's really important. And I heard somebody just today say, well, if we don't solve this problem, this is someone who is in support of the project, that if we don't solve this problem, then we'll have to look at the fact that we have, the blight that not solving the problem will produce. And I said, looking at the problem isn't the problem, it's being complicit in the problem that your neighbors and your community members are suffering from. That is the problem. Anyway. As you know, I'm a longtime organizer with the Poor People's Campaign here in Maine. I also work closely with the Greater Waterville Poverty Action Coalition. I spend a part of every week as another part of my retirement working with poor and low-income folks who are patients at Inland Hospital, and many of them tell me they're desperate housing-related stories. I spend another chunk of my time every week at the concourse giving out much-needed food and basic supplies, whatever we have available, some of which I pay for myself, some of which the Poverty Action Coalition pays for, and the Community Investors Program pays for, whatever we have available that week to poor, low wealth, and homeless people who are abundant in the concourse, and I hear their desperate stories. I work with another organization called Housing Justice Maine, in connection with which I hear the desperate housing-related stories from all over the state of Maine, not just our community here. We are in a moment of crisis here in Waterville. We are in a moment of crisis in the state and in the country. Anything we can do to advance the common good of our community, and in this case specifically the housing security of our community members, is to the good. I simply cannot understand why the vote went the way it did last week, derailing a project, thankfully only temporarily it seems, but derailing a project that others had been working on for a long time, even before lingering concerns that some neighbors may have had, including neighbors who apparently are moving away from their home, could be effectively resolved. I'm very glad that this topic is being revisited. I'm grateful to Tom for agreeing to revisit it, and I hope that we will have a better income tonight because we so desperately need it here in Waterville. Thank you.
Katie. Hot seat. So, I sort of want to dispel some things. Like, if there, anyone who looks at my history knew that this would be a project that I would absolutely fight for. And while some of you talk about what happened in that building 2 years ago, I got to meet the people that night who lived in that building. I made sure that they could use the bathroom. They couldn't even get to their house. Why you didn't move then? I would have been gone. Like, that would have been the moment where I would have left. And there's well, I'll say nobody. I've gotten the phone calls. The group of people that live in that area do not hate poor people. That's not what their issue is. It's the uncertainty. Now, Cassie said that you're going to have 24-hour surveillance. Is that true?
That is correct.
So, I'm not sure anybody knew that. I'm not sure I actually knew that it was going to be 24-hour surveillance. I'm still not 100% sold. You know, I like the project. I like the idea. But how do you make that area, that community, whole at the same time? Like, the Berries have lived there, what is it, 16 years now? 17 years? And for the last 10 years, it's been pretty much the same. Like, they've had no neighbor to the right of them. Now, I've gone out there. I've got pictures of that entire neighborhood. I went out twice in this last weekend. And it makes sense to me that some sort of apartment building would go where that building is, because if I look across the street, those buildings sort of bookend the end of that road, and then you have the residential on the backside. I envision an apartment building as being like a buffer to the rest of the residential area from College Avenue. But there's still a lot of unknowns. Mm-hmm. And how are you going to assure them that the things they need are going to be part of your plan? Like, it's great to hear, well, maybe it'll be this way, maybe it'll be that way. And I think what a lot of people need to hear is that maybe it may be this way, but it will be that we're going to listen to you and that we're going to come up with something that should be suitable to 90% of us.
Yeah, I'll see your we'll listen to you, and I'll raise you one, too. You can be at the decision-making table. You can have a vote in how that building is redeveloped. I don't want to revisit all the ground that's already been covered. Hopefully, there's been some clarity on some of these issues vis-a-vis that third floor space. It looks like if we're going to have any office space, that is the logical place because it, covers a multitude of sins, right? We need some office space. People won't be in it. Evenings and weekends, we don't need to have our office space on the ground floor. We can keep that residential. So there's lots of ways that we have conversations, but then we invite the community in to serve on our board. We're looking for board members. We invite people to serve on the building committee, really shape the plans, get to know us as an agency, as an organization, build relationship. That's really the only way that I can give people clarity is for people to get to know us. Part of that right now is in our history. We have a really strong track record, I think, in the city of Waterville in terms of delivering high-quality services. We've committed, you know, one of the ways that we envisioned this project, because we wanted, as we've been looking at property since second half of last year, we've been searching for a suitable property. There are no short-term solutions to the crisis that we're in. It's 40 years in the making. It's going to take a long time for us to both build our way out of it, rezone our way out of it, accessory dwelling unit our way out of it. There's so many different things that we're going to have to do to get to where we need to be. This is just one little dot in a big impressionist painting that's going to transform the way housing looks. But as we were conceiving it, as we looked particularly at this building, we thought, okay, we have a couple of needs. We want to serve families. That's been at the heart of what Mid-Maine Homeless Shelter and Services has done since its inception in 1986. In our current location, we can no longer do that because we've committed to serving low barrier people experiencing homelessness. These are the guests that really cause people worry when folks see them, you know, unsheltered near the head of falls or sleeping under a bridge. We wanted to make sure that there was a place for people who are experiencing addiction or have major mental illness where those folks could be directed for services. So we've committed Colby Street, which is the ideal location for that, to that purpose. So where then do we go and take our littlest guests? And also, one of the growing categories of homelessness in the state of Maine, which Maine Housing is about to release its 2022 PIT count, it has trebled since 2019. The number of people on any given night experiencing homelessness has trebled. For us, one of those core populations are seniors, our neighbors, our elders. They're people who are on fixed incomes and they have limited ability to accept a lot of the limited housing that comes available. Many of them cannot accept it because there's stairs or there's some other mobility issue and they can't accept that unit. Our longest guest of all time was with us for 2 years before they passed away in shelter. This person, she was such a special person, had a life just like you and I had a life, worked in law enforcement in Lewiston for most of her career. And as a senior, suffered many setbacks and ended up with us for the last 2 years of her life. I think we gave her community. One of the things we find with our elders, very often when they're with us, after a little while, they don't want to leave. I have my shelter manager here, Richard, who's over in the corner, and he can attest to the fact that, you know, for a lot of these folks, having a sense of community, a place to go where their friends and their neighbors are going to love on them for the remaining years of their life. That's what we envisioned for this building. We know it's a resident. It's near Educare. It's walking distance to 2 schools. We wanted a place where we could combine our elders and our youngest guests. I have been a mom experiencing homelessness. I know what it's like to live out of your car with your children. And I know what it's like to finally find a place where you can unpack and that exhale of relief that you've got a place where you can close the doors and you've got your little family with you and you can reset. I know what that's like. I know some of you here know what that's like. We thought it would be a brilliant idea to combine these 2 groups of people, our youngest and our oldest, because they both need a feeling of security and community. We thought that this building would be a good fit for a whole host of reasons for this neighborhood, that it would not detract from the neighborhood, but that it would actually add value. And we could take a vacant, unused building and transform it into something that was really going to not only add spiritual value to the neighbors, but also, you know, increase property values as well. Other than saying that is our intention, and there's lots of steps along the way that get us to the point where we're actually moving people in and inviting people to not only, you know, express your views, but participate at the table, be a voting member. Other than making that offer, there's very few guarantees that we can make at this stage. We need to be able to buy the building to start that next stage of development work. We would be poor stewards of our donor resources that we're using right now for this part if we advance too far without feeling like we could actually get control of this building. We've done what we can reasonably do. If we can't get the zoning, contract zone lifted, we'll have to walk away from this project. There's only so much you can do at this stage. So my hope is that people will come along with us, that they'll sit with us, that they'll visit with us, that they'll learn about the work that we do, that they'll understand what family homelessness is like, that they'll begin to understand what it's like to be a senior experiencing homelessness and realize that this isn't going to do anything other than uplift that particular little spot on the map and hopefully do a lot of good for the city of Waterville.
Any questions for Katie?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I just have a point of clarification, just because of all the emails that I've read. And by the way, to everybody that has sent an email, I have read every single one of them, okay? Every one of them. I want that to be known right here, right now. This has been enlightening, but I have a question has come to my mind that the last week when you were here, it was a 30 to 60 day stay. And then, and I'm assuming, and some of this is I'm assuming that you're planning on in those 30 to 60 days, you're trying to find them permanent housing, okay? Am I right in assuming that? Because I've also heard some of the testimony tonight that it was, the seniors, by the sound of it, was going to be there a lot longer than that. And that's my confusion. Is this a 30 to 60 day place, or is this a long-term situation?
Both and let me clarify. So for the seniors, the way that the RFP that we're pursuing is structured, we can use public money to help underwrite the costs of this construction. Maine State Housing requires that 80% of the units be permanent rental apartments. That's where the seniors will be placed. So once they'll be leased up and they will be tenants and they will stay for however long they want to stay. We can use 20% of the units that we develop to expand shelter. One of the things that we've learned throughout the course of the pandemic is that congregate shelter, like Colby Street, is not a good location for families with children. Congregate shelter is a terrible, terrible, terrible disservice. So we have been in search of a solution to serving households with children because we don't want to serve them at Colby Street. We want to give them their own temporary unit. Now, when we talk about length of stay, the way it works in homeless shelters funded through Maine Housing is when we offer somebody a bed, they stay until they find housing. Currently, at the FEMA shelter that we operate, our average length of stay is pushing 150 days. Nobody's asked to leave until they find housing. So the target for households with children, in my sector, 30 days is the gold standard, right? You want to be able to, when we talk about homelessness as being a rare and brief experience. Brief means 30 days or less. Given the length of given the nature of our housing crisis, 30 days is unreasonable. So we're setting a target of 60 days. We think that's more reasonable to help families experiencing homelessness find suitable permanent housing. But they stay as long as they need to. Nobody's asked to leave until that forever home is leased up and they're ready to move in.
Okay, I have one more. Go ahead. Okay, now I'm going to be a little bit uncomfortable. Katie, the last time you and I had a conversation was 2 years ago. And I think the conversation went along the lines of, have you and the other party talked? I'm going to ask you the same question here. Have you and the other parties talked about your differences and how you get from here to where it's an amicable situation? Has that conversation happened?
Since last Tuesday, in the last 7 days?
Yep.
No, it has not.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you.
Will it?
Yes, it will. As you can hear from my voice, I'm getting over an illness, so the last 7 days have been a little hairy for us, for me personally, but certainly, and again, as Brian pointed out, you know, every time we hear something from people, we heard feedback from you, Jay, and you, Rebecca, we went back and asked people to do some redesigns. too many small units. We want a bigger unit. So we went back and made bigger units. For some of the feedback that we've heard over the last few days, right? Instead of putting something in that third floor, we thought, okay, let's redesign it and see what it looks like if we don't put anything on that third floor. That might be a solution that we can take forward. So it's not that we're not listening and taking on board or sitting down. It can take time to organize schedules, but we're certainly hearing and trying to incorporate the feedback, even at this early stage before we've got permanent plans in place. When it comes time to design permanent plans, that's when we'd really love to have the community at the table with us. So it's not just us listening, but it's them giving direction as well.
And Mayor, if I may, that's kind of why, I've been, I hate to use the words because it doesn't sound right, but beat over the head with a stick about my non-want of a homeless shelter in Waterville and how, it's not what we want. That's not my purpose. That's never been my intent of this project. My intent has been to listen to both sides and find some common ground and make sure that we're listening, we're actively listening. And some will blame me for trying to underwrite and call it a Sacred Heart Church situation. And sometimes I don't exactly deliver the right verbiage to express what I'm trying to say, just like I'm doing right now. But at the end of the day, you two are so close, or let me rephrase that. You and the citizens around that property are so close to having, I think, the verbal and written agreement that would allow you to open that place and get everybody's votes on this council without question. Hence why I said, geez, it sounds like you guys just need a couple more weeks to work this out. And it's really a closed-door session. And I understand your committee that you want to form, and I don't discredit that at all. I think you guys are really close to making this happen and have the residents around you happy and have you happy, and everybody is just a green light and go. Because I don't think anybody on this council is ever going to be against a homeless shelter, ever. And I can say that for myself. It's about making sure that all the players in this game, and I hate to use the word game, but it is, everybody's happy. And I don't think you're very far apart. I think you're very close. So that's where I'm coming from. That's why I'm asking these pointed questions. Was the last time, 2 years ago, was the last time you and I spoke, and my phone didn't ring this time. And I'm an active listener. I've read all the emails. I've sat here and listened to everybody. And I wish there was a time that you and the residents around you at that location could come into a room and sit down and just bang out some ideas and say, hey, you know what? We've got a workable solution. Let's rock and roll.
And I'll just add that the first of what I hope is many conversations, just as you've described, took place 8 days ago. It didn't happen after the Tuesday meeting. It happened the day before. And I'm more than willing to have many, many, many more of those conversations. And I appreciate that people feel like this is moving very, very quickly. It feels like this has been a long process for me because I'm in it, and I feel the existential crisis that we're in around housing, but also in terms of how do you finance projects like this? The reality is we've got a small window of opportunity to secure some public dollars. We're hoping that we can achieve that. We're very confident that we will do well. There are no guarantees. But this is not something that we can take another 6 weeks to schedule all the conversations and go back to the architects and design more plans. It really comes down to, is this, what's reasonable? What's the reasonable expectation for an agency like ours in terms of the preparatory work before we come before the planning board and come before council to say, is it appropriate to lift a contract zone and revert a property that was residential back to a residential use? And then we can get engaged in the very messy and exciting work of figuring out how to make this a beautiful fit for the neighborhood. I wish I had 6 months. Unfortunately, I don't. Not for this project, not at this time. And I don't know when the window will open again for us to secure additional funding that makes this a viable property.
I got a question. So going back to Council Foss' point that we are getting really close, like my understanding of it is like, yeah, we are really close, so why can't we just let this first vote go through in order for us to continue the conversation? Because clearly it sees that it's going back to the planning board. So we are going to be able to chime in, and the residents will be able to be part of this discussion on the next phase. But we're like so stuck on this first phase that we can't let it go through. But yet we're so close.
Councilor Gray? Oh. I'm gonna let her go. You can
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate Councilor Foss's comments, and completely agree that this is about active listening. So I'm wondering what that would look like for those residents who are here tonight. What would you like, are we close? And what do you need as far as dialogue at this point?
I have a question before you step down. Let's say you get this contract zone lifted.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do if you don't get the funding?
It will likely take us longer, right? So getting this funding means that we can go faster. I suspect that if we don't secure this funding, another window will open up, but it might not be this calendar year. It might be in another calendar year. It might mean that we have to do more work in terms of private philanthropy. That takes a lot longer than securing public funding from Maine Housing through ARPA funding. So it lengthens the timeline. It doesn't necessarily mean that the project is dead forever. It's one of those things where in construction there are no guarantees, you know? And any project is dependent on securing all the funding, and you don't typically have all of the funding in place at this phase. We've got a lot of seed funding, and we think we're in a really strong position. That's the best guarantee that I can give.
Okay,
So can we go back to my question?
go ahead. Sorry.
I mean,
He's
this-
gonna answer you.
Oh, okay, thank you, great.
He's got you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon Gilly. I live in Ward 1, and of course, I'm here to answer your question in regards to, I'm here to represent my ward in regards to our concerns. I have some of the things have been already addressed, but I wrote something, so I'm just going to read it anyway, so if that's all right. I, for one, am in favor of taking a vacant building in our community that currently serves no purpose as a shelter for elderly and needy families. The housing crisis in Waterville isn't getting any better, and I appreciate everyone's efforts here to try and come up with solutions to solve it. What I am here today is to address the concerns my community has and to help with finding solutions to their concerns that also benefits this incredibly important project. First is the cost. I heard that it's something along the lines of $900 per square feet. Is that cost going to be raised by the Mid-Maine Homeless Shelter? Is the option to have the Maine Housing Authority funds still on the table? Would any of that cost befall the Waterville taxpayer? The second concern is that our community prides itself on being a quiet, tight-knit neighborhood where foot and vehicle traffic are scarce. If this project were to go forward, the amount of the construction work that would need to be done would certainly disrupt the quiet neighborhood everyone enjoys. Dust, noise pollution, construction vehicles are a big concern for nearby homes. The other major concern that I'm hearing about from those in my neighborhood is the possibility of increased crime. Waterville police rarely patrol that part of the city, and thankfully, they do not need to. But as Katie Spencer said last week, the site may not be staffed full-time, and if an emergent situation arose, what risk would that pose to this neighborhood? A traffic accident happened on Central Ave just the other week, and it took 32 minutes for law enforcement to arrive. Privacy concerns, increased traffic concerns, cost concerns, law enforcement concerns, parking concerns, noise pollution concerns all matter and should be taken into consideration. I'll now focus on a few members of our community leadership. Councillor Mike Morris and Councillor Rick Foss, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for your vote last week. Councillor Foss for taking into consideration the many questions this housing project still asks, and for trying to compromise with your fellow councillors in the Mid-Main Homeless Shelter to address all the what-ifs. Councillor Mike Morris, who represents me in Ward 1, I know this vote was a difficult one. You took into consideration the thoughts and concerns of your constituents and represented Ward 1 with respect and consideration, and I thank you for that as well. To the rest of the City Council, I thank you for voting for everyone who wonders where they will rest their heads at night, for those who feel forgotten, and for those who may feel they don't have a voice. Everyone deserves to have a warm, clean, safe place to go. We need to do better as a community to address all these issues and problems that arise. As I said earlier, Waterville needs to address the homeless crisis, and I would like to also thank Katie Spencer for the incredible work she does and continues to do. Mayor Coelho, you have done well to represent Waterville. However, some of the concerns that I heard about was a social media post that said, quote, "You know how mad the residents are going to be when you save the elderly housing project." Simply not true. Nobody is mad. We just want to ensure that our community and our concerns are taken seriously. And when I saw that, it felt like a schoolyard bully saying, "I win, you lose." That doesn't create solutions, and that is not something a leader should do. That creates more divisiveness. I look forward to having more discussions about this incredibly important housing project. As I said before, homelessness is a major problem for our community and one that needs to be solved. We all need to work together. And when we come as a community, we can come together and work together, and I am positive that we can make anything work. Thank you very much.
I got a question.
Hold on.
Well,
So you're not wrong. So in that post, I was annoyed. It was not 15 minutes earlier. When I say not everyone in your ward hates poor people, we had this discussion. I won't tell you the context of that conversation that came, but I have daughters, and that phone call before that post, absolutely, that person wasn't going to say something like that to somebody like me, and I wasn't going to punch back. It was more about not backing down. I knew that this was one of those fights, and again, anyone who has seen my history over the last few years knew that this is one that I was going to fight. And I knew that that one person, too, was not representative of what Ward 1 was. So, to those that I offended, I mean, it's going to happen from time to time. It's not my intent to go out and offend anyone. But that day, I had a nerve struck, and absolutely, I was trying to offend somebody. You were not it. The people that I have spoken to, the Bears, they are not it. But there is a segment of this population still in this city that want to see poor people with poor people. And that pisses me off. It makes me angry. And it should make lots of people angry. So I am unapologetically myself. And some days I'm going to stumble because I am human. But I appreciate your words, and I hope that you accept mine.
Of course.
Because my words were absolutely not geared towards you.
Does anybody else have any questions?
yeah. Well, I have a question. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for being here. So my question is like, would you like to see this conversation going forward? What's the next step? Or do you want to see this project dead? That's my question, pretty much.
As I said previously, I think the homelessness issue in Waterville needs to be addressed, and I think this is a good way and a good step to continue the conversation and hoping, and helping those who need it.
So if we was to take a first vote on this and is to go forward in order for us to have more conversation about it, would that be okay with you?
It would.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
How do you guys get from where you are right now with the homeless shelter to where you need to be so that y'all, so that, and use the word y'all because too many years in
These are
Tennessee.
yokel.
How do you guys accept 100% what's missing from this?
I think that from what I'm hearing is a lot of, you know, possibilities, what ifs. It might cost 15 million, it might cost 12 million. It might, I think that has a lot to do with it as well. A lot of the building construction and things of that sort.
Take
to
the
be honest
money,
with you.
take the money in the construction phase out of this. What's missing to make this a deal for the residents around it and the homeless shelter from your seat? What's missing outside of construction? That's not your worry. The money part is not your worry. That homeless shelter sets up office. What's left between you and that to make that happen? Is there anything missing? The privacy concerns, the fence, the this, the that. What bridges the gap here?
Are you asking me in regards to my personal thought on it?
Yeah. And I say that because when you stood up, you said that you were representing the residents around there. So that's why I'm asking these questions.
I honestly think that in regards to a lot of the foot traffic, increased noise pollution, increased vehicles, a parking lot, I think that is a concern. And I think that, you know, everyone here has done really, really well to address those issues. So if you're asking me personally, you know, I for one, of course, am in favor for this project, and I think that it's important that those that do have those concerns are addressed in regards to, you know, the security concerns, law enforcement. Are there going to be increased law enforcement patrols in the neighborhood? I think that also is a big concern as well.
Go ahead.
I guess I'm seeing a mismatch here because I thought that we had addressed the concerns about safety, that these will not be people who are, that you need to fear.
Right, but
in bringing more crime to the neighborhood. And also, they're mostly elderly. I'm guessing a lot of them won't be driving. And probably many of them will seldom leave their homes. I don't know. I defer to Katie on that. But so it seems like you're holding on to some of the things that the homeless shelter has addressed tonight. And so I think it's fair to put aside the issue of safety and traffic for now. I have the same question. What would it take for you to, what do you need for this project to work? What's standing between where we are now and the project? Okay. Well, I guess I just want to say, because if we are going to have dialogue, let's have it. I don't think anyone wants to go over the same ground again, right? That's all. And I was hearing some of.
More time to speak to his neighbors about that, but at this point, he did say that he's fine with going ahead with the first round vote.
Okay.
In support of, which I think
that's correct.
Is very cut and dry.
All right.
Okay.
That's okay. I'm sure he'll repeat what I said, right? Will you repeat what I said for the camera?
Yes, it was that, we are, I am, of course, willing to have this conversation go forward and have further discussions to address everyone's concerns.
Okay.
And so, and following up with that question, because I think Katie answered it earlier, but isn't there, didn't you invite people to join part of the board, part of the process as well?
Can we move to a vote?
How do you feel about that?
That would be wonderful.
That's all I needed
He's
to
on
hear.
plenty of city boards.
I am indeed.
Mayor, if I may,
Yes.
there are two folks online that have their hands raised for quite some time.
Please bring him in. And then I'm going to move this to a vote. Thanks, Brian.
Hillary Koch is coming in now. Hillary, can you hear us?
Hi, Hillary.
I can. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
nice to see everyone. Even if it's this way. Haven't seen some of you in years. I did prepare something. Warning, I've got a dog here who, like, the minute he hears me speaking, starts snorting. So he's like here snorting. I had two thoughts that kind of came to mind as people were talking, but I kind of just want to read what I've prepared. And if someone wouldn't mind just asking me when I'm finished, I would really appreciate if I can kind of remember what I wanted to sort of address. I would appreciate it. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Hillary Koch. I'm a resident of Ward 4, and I am also a member of the Planning Board. However, I'm here tonight just to speak as a private citizen. I'm not representing the Planning Board in any way. I have a vague memory of hiding in our apartment when I was really little, maybe when I was 3 years old, and my mother telling my sister and me to be really quiet. The landlord was knocking on our door, and we didn't have the rent for an apartment that didn't have heat, my mother reminded me tonight. When I was in elementary school, I remember being on free and then reduced lunches for a while. My mother reminded me tonight that was throughout all of high school. And my mother used food stamps at the store. None of this embarrassed me because there were actually a lot of families that were just like mine. But now that I'm an adult with a family of my own, I have the wisdom to look back and see the reality of the situation. My mother was divorced without a college degree, who must have been exhausted and scared and probably hungry at times. She most definitely went without, so her children never would. Yet despite knowing my mother struggled financially, I was fortunate to always have a place to call home. This is, however, not the case for thousands of people living in America. In the last year, home prices across the United States have soared by over 20%, and mortgage rates are the highest that they've been since 2009. You'll have read headlines about home ownership being out of reach for millennials, but as we've heard tonight, the reality is that home ownership is out of reach for most people. Essentials like food, utilities, and medical costs are so high that it isn't unusual to hear about people dying from hunger, lack of heat, or for those of you who know me really well, people rationing medications. So when we talk about the housing crisis, you'd think that renting would be the obvious and reasonable option. But the supply-demand for rental units is so lopsided that rentals are nearly impossible to come by, and prices have skyrocketed. In fact, since 2019, Kennebec County has seen the second highest increase in rental prices for the entire state of Maine. The results? A lot of people have found themselves without a place to live. These people are without homes. They are homeless, but they are not less than. They are part of every community, our community. They are worthy of respect, dignity, help, and a roof over their head. They aren't lazy or looking for a handout. They are looking for your help. Help many of you promised when you were running to be elected. You talked about looking out for the little guy, wanting to make sure that as the revitalization process in Waterville continued, that we didn't forget the type of folks who helped make Waterville, Waterville. Now I'm sitting here in the comfort of my own home, wondering if that was all lip service. If when you said you'd help the little guy, what you really meant is you'd help people so long as they didn't lose their home after, say, they had to choose between buying medication or paying rent. So maybe you just wanted to help the medium-sized guy. See, the job of serving an elected office is to serve everyone, not just the people you deem worthy. And it certainly isn't to degrade, demean, dehumanize, or perpetuate stereotypes. Finally, I want to speak to these stereotypes. I do acknowledge that stereotypes stem from some truth. Yes, there are homeless who have criminal records, who are sexual predators who struggle with drugs. This is not true for all people who are homeless, and not true for the people who will be housed here. The homeless shelter has already addressed this, stating there will be 24/7 surveillance with a strict screening process. If you're lucky enough to have a roof over your head, I'm wondering though, who did the screening process for the neighbors you have right now? My point is, if we are fortunate enough to choose where we live, it is rare that we're ever able to choose our neighbors. The Highwood Apartments would be housed with elderly and families and children who have been screened. People who are down and out, people worthy of the dignity and safety of shelter. And you have the opportunity to help make that happen. So I'm asking you to please vote to help make that happen. And one final note, my mother, she benefited from so much from others who helped her. She got her college degree. I'm getting choked up, and she's now a homeowner here in Waterville.
Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you so much.
Who was the other person?
Okay, I will,
And after this person, I'm moving to a vote.
she has taken her hand down now.
All right, then Patty, can I get a roll call?
Council Morris?
So at this point, so that we can continue this conversation, although right now this isn't the second vote, which I would be a no at, I am going to say yes to continue this conversation. And it's surprising to me that, you know, when someone like myself or residents reach out for information on a project and it doesn't get returned by the people that you reach out to, it's a little frustrating, and to understand that, well, you know, listen, we want you to be part of the process, but, you know, when I reached out to you, Katie, on April 4th for information before this came to the city council to move to the planning board, I still haven't heard anything. And, you know, the fact that we get to the point where, you know, we're finally meeting with residents. You know, this is a big PR project. You know, you want to put a homeless shelter in the middle, you know, just on the fringe of this, you know, up and coming neighborhood. And, you know, like, you've known about it for months. You go to the planning board at the beginning of April, but don't talk to any residents in the area of whose lives you're going to interrupt with this particular project. And I don't need any more stats on homelessness. I get it. Like, we have homeless, but, like, we've got to talk about these other folks who's you're bringing that to, and they're also an important part of the conversation that nobody wanted to apparently have with them until the day before the city council meeting. And again, nobody knew really much about the project until they went to the planning board. So to continue this conversation, and I hope that you and your people meet with these people to have conversation, and they come back to me and say, okay, well, we feel a little bit better, then great. I'm going to say yes tonight, but next week I'm a no, and I can tell you that right now until I get some more information. So I'm a yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It was on a time limit. I apologize. That was the longest yes I ever did.
Councilor DeBrito?
Yes.
Councilor Klepak?
Yes.
Councilor Green?
Yes.
Councilor Foss?
I'm going to echo Mr. Morris's sentiments, and I know everybody can hear me on this microphone and in this room. But the one thing that I want to remind everybody, including in this room and on that screen, is that we do this discourse in polite, respectful manner. We kind of lost our crap last week. But, you know, I own it. It is what it is. Okay. It's a human condition. Okay. I've got some stats that go against what people are saying, and I'm not opposed to this project. I have never been opposed to this project, other than making sure that the residents that live around this, that are going to live with this after these decisions are made, are happy with it. Because that's how we keep this community happy and how we build it. And if people are mad about a project and it goes through, like Sacred Heart, it's not about the event center. It's not about the event center. It's about the situation. The residents around this project are not, they're not being met, Katie. And when I said 2 years ago, that was last time you and I talked, I'm echoing Councilor Morris's thing. Let's see some movement, or I'm gonna be a no with it next time. I'm giving the yes right now to move this forward. But I need to see some movement. I wanna see, I don't think anybody's looking for, you're going to make the third floor, an office, you're gonna make the second floor an office facing 8 Highwood, blah, blah, blah. It's that there's discourse and there's communication back and forth and camaraderie, building, just having a great conversation about it, and everybody coming back in here next week and go, yeah, you know what, we've moved a lot of metal, and we've come a long ways since last week. So I'm a yes for right now.
Thank you. Counselor Frankie?
Yes.
Counselor McCormick?
Yes, and I want to say part of the reconsideration was to get you here tonight for this very purpose. Everybody tells me there's going to be communications. I got communications. I got you here tonight.
Oh, there we go.
That's a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Done.